everyone. Alright, so sorry it's been a while. I've been insanely busy and I've also come down with some sort of weird coronavirus type of thing the last couple of weeks, so it's made things a bit of a struggle. Busy around the shop, so we've got some 7-port stuff, some K1200 stuff, some more side mount bits and pieces, loads of stuff going on, but we want to try and dig into our own engine now. So for those of you that don't know the spec on the old one, I'll quickly run through it, nice and simple. So it was effectively a bone stock 998 bottom end with some ARP rod bolts and ARP head studs. Cylinder head was a 12G 940, so off the 1275s. Real mild, really basic porting, 3-angle valve seats and 26cc forced induction shaped chambers. Standard rockers. We had a Med T3 cam in there with a vernier, and that was about it. Strapped a big turbo to the back of it, threw a load of boost down its neck, and it made just shy of 180 horsepower at about 21 pounds of boost. So we did pretty well. Didn't survive too long. Posted a video a while back on Instagram just of the state of the pistons. So piston from cylinder 1 and cylinder 3 had both broken the ringlands down. Doesn't look like it was detonation, it looks more like it was, we just way exceeded the cylinder pressures. Those pistons, which were bog standard acrylite neural pistons, were just never designed for that amount of power. So we know the limits of those now, and then this time we're going to try and turn it up a little bit. So we're aiming for 200 horsepower. I think we can just about get there, but the head is going to be the limit. I'm kind of going to leave the head alone. We know it works. But if we don't get to 200, the cylinder head is the problem. We might change it and try again. We might not, it depends. We've got a lot of stuff going on for next year. The big build that we want to do does involve us having to sell the car, which potentially has already gone. But we're still in talks, and this engine will stay with it. So whatever state of tune it ends up in, that'll be up for grabs for the next owner. So just walk you through what's going into this one. So we'll start at the bottom. So running standard rods, there's no budget for the Signs ones as much as we would like them. These ones have been balanced end for end. They've also been honed on the big end just with the ARP fasteners, and the small end has also been honed for some larger diameter fully floating pins. I won't show you how we balance those, but there's loads of videos around there, but nice and simple. It's just a case of taking tiny little bits off the right places on the sort of non-stressed areas. Main caps, not gone too crazy with these. I don't really believe in running big steel main caps or grinding the tops off the centre just for the sake of it. So we've just had these machined flat, and then we're running some nice little countersunk ARP fasteners. So the main trouble with these is the standard fasteners eat their way into the top of the cap. That's why you end up losing the torque on them, and that's why you end up getting crank whip. So really easy to do. Let's say flatten them off, set of ARP washers, job done, use the standard fasteners, you don't have to worry about machining anything then. Let's see, crankshaft, fully standard. We've had a little bit of machining on the end just to tidy up the taper, but standard journals on the big end and on the mains. Nothing crazy here. We're not shooting for massive RPM. We're going to try and hopefully turn it up to about 7.5, maybe 7.7, but it just depends on where we keep making power. We've got a Med Engineering S damper kit, so with the management pulley, obviously without the tooth knocked off for now. We'll do that once it's in the car. Standard thrust bearings. And then we've got some ACL race big ends and some main bearings. So we've always struggled in the past on the 1000cc's to be able to get race bearings for both. I'm now being able to find a supplier for those, so if anyone's struggling and wants a matched set of ACL race bearings, give me a shout and I can see what I can do to help. And then the big ticket items are these lovely Traum pistons. So I'll try and get one up close. So obviously tiny because we're still running 998cc. So these are plus 20 overbore. A little bit smaller than we wanted, but there's a whole story behind that that I won't go into. but it does mean we're staying on the same engine size that we were running last year, so anything we change will be a direct comparison. So these are a fully forged piston. They've got a thicker crown on the top, and then we've gone for ceramic coated tops and anti-friction coating on the skirts as well. 16mm pins, kept them wrapped up for now. So I think they're 30 thou larger than the standard ones, which is why we've gone for the honed little ends. And then a really nice set of piston rings, which will start gapping today. Then moving over to the block, so looks pretty familiar. This isn't the original one. Obviously, as we said, we were going to shoot for a larger piston size, but we haven't been able to for one reason or another, so we've had to go for another block, get it completely remachined. The old block had gone out round on the cylinders and it was already plus 20, so there's nothing we could do with that. We either had to go up the size on the pistons, which was the plan, but now we're sticking with plus 20, so we're just going to drop a brand new block in there, or I say a newly machined block. So all of this has been done by Specialist Components for us. Really, really nice job. Nothing too crazy, so fully dry decked as the old one was. Nothing too outrageous with that, so obviously all blocked off and skimmed. We've got some new pockets, so the pockets are 3mm deep and they're slightly larger than the old ones, but just to give us scope that if we do decide to go for a bigger cylinder head later in the year or early next year, we've got the ability to. So these are prepped for 31mm valves. Our current setup, our cylinder head is actually a small valve metro head, so it's really limited on the output, to be honest. Other than that, it's just super clean, so we'll go through and clean this up later. So first job is obviously super clean the block, and then we want to go through, we do the piston ring gaps first, show you quickly how we do that, and then I'll do a bit of a time lapse of doing the rest of them. Then we're going to move on to crank end float, and then we'll start measuring up the journal clearances on the mains first, then on the big ends, and then potentially in this video we might be able to get the short block together, but we're not too sure. And then we'll get into the new cam specs, timing the cam in, and then I'll go through the head and things in a bit more detail. Alright, so the brake cleaner's out, so we're just going to give everything a real nice clean. You can't clean these too much, basically just go until the towel comes out perfectly clear. So we're going to start with top ring on cylinder 1. So you can buy tools to do this, but I tend to just use the piston and drop it into a certain level. Bear in mind, I'm not an engine builder, this is just me building our own, so don't take any of this as gospel. Gently drop the ring in, and then use the piston to square everything up. Nice and square in the bore. And then Traum sent us all the specs for these, so we're shooting for a minimum clearance of 17 thou on these ones. We've got 18, lovely. So first one in, first one we don't have to touch. Not great for the video, but good for me. So next up is the top ring. So top and bottom ring, or sorry, top and second ring on these are the same specs. The oil control ring is slightly looser, or slightly tighter, sorry, so we'll recheck those again. Right, so this one's a little tight, so this one's coming out at 15. So, I'm just going to run across. There we have it. So that's top and second ring done on cylinder 1. Now, what's going to be about 20 seconds for you is going to be about 30 minutes for me. So catch you on the other side. Okay, so piston ring gaps are all done. Nice and quick for you guys, pretty slow for me. So next up, we're just going to look at crank side of things. So there's two things that I'm going to do first. I'm going to stick a set of main bearings in and then just check to see where the oil passages are. I'll show it in a little bit more detail when I do it, but a lot of times the oil hole in the block misaligns to the bearing, which then means you get a pretty crap oil pressure and oil delivery. So something really simple to look out for. It does mean a tiny bit of grinding into the block, so you'll have to wash it again, but it's worth doing now rather than suffering the issues later down the line. Then we're going to go and look at crank end float. Then we're going to start looking into main bearing and big end bearing clearances. So that's a bit of a slow one. We'll get into more detail of that once I start doing it, but that's using a thing called plastic gauge. So anyone that's not used it, it's a small little, tiny little string of plastic. These little things here. And then once you compress that to the right torque, it expands to a certain diameter and then you read it and then that's your bearing clearance and then you can adjust from there. So we'll quickly get into it and I'll show you a little bit more about it in a second. Alright, so some prime examples. So if we look at the centre main, absolutely perfect, no issues there whatsoever. And then if we come over to the two ends, if that focuses up, you can just see, so that oil passage is only through half of the bearing. And then it's not quite as bad on the other side. So I'm not going to do it right now, I'm going to measure all the bearing clearances and stuff first. And then once we've done, I'm just going to take a small little die grinder into there, just open that channel out on the two ends, just so the oil can flow straight into the bearing and we don't have any issues down the line. And again, we'll just wash the block straight afterwards, but something that's quite often overlooked, but really simple to catch at these early stages. So, bearings are in the caps. We're just going to do the centre for now because we only want to measure the end float, but I've quickly just knocked in the dowels into the block. And then obviously lowered the crank in place with the lower part of the main bearings in. So we're just going to bolt this one up and then quickly show you how I tend to measure the end float. It's nothing too crazy, nothing too revolutionary, just a big screwdriver and a DTI gauge. Alright, so we're just going to set DTI up. So nice little magnetic base. Okay, and just using a nice screwdriver, just make sure it's all the way to one side. Right, so right now we've got about 2 to 3 thou of end float. So you can just see it moving there. It's closer to 2. So just going to open it up a little bit. So we're just going to put it on some wet and dry. I'm going to take off the casting marks from where they stamp it on the back of the thrust bearings first. Then if we still need to do a little bit more, we'll take some more off the back side. Alright, so still going through the process of trying to get the end float in check, but in true Tony Angelo fashion, piece has just turned up. So having a little break. And with the magic of editing, what's taken me about an hour and a half, it's taken you mere seconds. So that's pretty terrible. To -1 thou. And don't know if you can see that very well. That's 4. So we've got 5 thou. So I was shooting for kind of 5. After having a bit of a read up, I think we should have been going for closer to 5 or 6. So going to leave it at that because we're going to run an RTS. So a little bit tighter on the thrust will probably help us out in the long run, and then we'll sort out the rest of the clearances. But now, given that it's almost 10 o'clock in the evening, I'm going to try and see if I can measure a couple of the main bearing clearances, and then we'll probably leave it for that. So these tiny little red strings you can see are what's called plastic gauge. So small little plastic string, and basically when you clamp it down in between the bearing surfaces, it'll expand to a certain size, and then once you reference how wide it is, that tells you what your oil clearances are. So the big thing to make sure of here is when you start to put the crank in, or the big ends, whichever, you can't spin it. So it needs to stay static, else you just smear the plastic everywhere. So we're just going to cut some tiny little pieces out and just lay them on the tops of the bearings, and then we'll gently lower the crank in. We'll do the same on the tops of the crank onto the bearing surfaces, and then we'll torque everything down, then we'll take everything back off again, and then we'll see what the clearances are just by referencing it across the top and obviously making a note of it. So you can just see the small strip of plastic gauge there. Across all 3. So we're just going to really gently lower the crank in place. And then we'll start putting the caps on. So always start from the centre. Let's get that nicely seated over the dowels. Keeping things nice and steady. That's one. There's 2. Okay, and then back off again. All that trying to touch the crank. Now these top main caps, because they're all doweled in position, it's quite hard to get them to come off straight. So if you do this, and then your plastic gauge is all kind of smushed, don't worry, because I'm probably about to do the same thing. So I'm hoping we can pull the caps off, and then we'll check out the top plastic gauge first. Then we'll lift the crank back out and have a look, see if we can see the bottom. And then fingers crossed, we're somewhere around these two. Let's try this cut first. Okay, that one's worked out nicely. That one's gone quite nicely as well. Right, third time's the charm. Oh, we're 3 for 3. I'll take it all back. I wasn't going to smush it at all. Right, hang on, we haven't seen the bottom ones yet. So, you can see there just how it spreads out. This one's a little messy, so that's where it's just stuck to the bearing at the top. Then, all we need to do is just reference how wide the smush is. So we're almost matching 38th thou. And then pretty much matching it there on the centre. And on the outside. And then we'll try and gently lift out the crank and we'll see what it's like underneath. And then if we flip that over, you can see all the marks on the bottom. So what we'll do is we'll do exactly the same thing. Just lay that on the top there. Take the plastic gauge. And we're about exactly there too. So it's not so bad. Alright, so that's the plastic gauge mains. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can do the big ends with everything off, because I'll just do the rods onto the crank. I don't really have time to try and put the rods up from underneath and mess around that way, but I'll let you know at the end of the video. I'll show you the little scorecard that we've got with all the bearing clearances, and then in part 2 what we'll start doing is building the rods up, and then we'll finally get the short block kind of built. Cam for it should be turning up tomorrow or the day after, so Part 2 should see the full short block go back together. We've got a clearanced oil pump coming from Mr. Stringer, the bearded Yorkshireman. Let's see what else have we got going on in the short block. Not a huge amount. We might get into cam timing next time. I'll put a couple of pictures up of the work we've done for drilling out the oil feed into the main bearings, just to show you what that looks like. But otherwise, that's it, folks. Bit of a slow one. It's taken me kind of 3 or 4 hours tonight. Building these isn't necessarily quick, especially not when you don't do them very often like I do. Let's say we've only ever built our own, so I'm not a dab hand. It's not like I can just run in and just quickly face off all of these thrust bearings and things and be done. So it's enjoyable, but it takes a lot of time. But we also need to know exactly what's going on in the engine to be able to tune it to its absolute limit. So we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in.